CIA document was released not too long ago. It's called the Adam and Eve document. And in that document, it discusses that scientists had done studies of what would occur during a pole shift. And it's the worst case scenario, 700 mile per hour winds, totally biblical proportion types of cataclysms. Well, that's not quite how scientists expect it to play out now. This was a study done in the 1960s. They knew very little about the atmosphere, how it works, how it wouldn't just fly around the planet like they postulated in the 60s. Now they know more about how the wind systems work, and it wouldn't be as bad. But that information has come out recently, and there have been some scientific papers that I might be able to give you to link here of scientists finding signs of solar matter on the back of the moon during the Apollo missions. They were bringing back this black glass and some other material, and it turned out that it was actual material ejected from the sun. And this was also found on Mars.
So what you're saying is the moon at one time was in an opposite direction. So the dark side of the moon was facing the sun at one point?
Well, the dark side of the moon was facing the sun at the moment that it had this 360-degree mass coronal ejection, where it sent solar matter in all directions. And this occurs on a cycle every 25,000 years, 12,000 years, 4,000 years, different intensities. And it's kind of like a pulse that we're finding out that other stars have. We've noticed that Alpha Centauri had a flash not too long ago. And a couple of other stars that we've been tracking have periodic flashes. So we're finding out that these stars are releasing pressure so that they don't go supernova at some point. They're having smaller novas to release mass and pressure.
Recent CIA release of this polar shift investigation.
Right, so my understanding of that is simply what I've seen through Ben Davidson of Suspicious Observers, and it essentially looks like it's a book that was classified by the CIA, and it details the polar shift, the not just geomagnetic, but literal geophysical polar shift. So not only do we have the electromagnetic poles of our Earth ready to shift, but we also have, that could mean also an Earth tilt. And I believe Ben Davidson was detailing how that tilt could go 90 degrees and then back, which is very intriguing. And the reason, of course, the CIA classified it is that is a massive, massive red pill, basically, that if the people knew about it, well, that would confirm a whole lot of stuff from ancient history, a lot of scripture and text that they were trying to tell us. They don't want that stuff legitimized. And they also, of course, don't want people to really understand what's going on with our sun and the electric universe model. They want to prop up their standard model physics that is tons of misinformation mixed in to sell their agenda with, basically. If people were to realize what our sun actually is, what it's going to do, they would live their lives a whole lot differently, and they wouldn't be trusting what's told to us by the authorities quite as much.
What we're seeing with the possibility of a pole shift is that, first of all, the magnetic field of the planet is starting to collapse. It's diminishing in strength more and more, and this makes the planet more susceptible to solar rays that are pouring in, especially at the poles, because of the shape of the Earth's magnetosphere. So as more solar rays come in, because we're at this kind of point where the Earth's magnetic field is collapsing and moving really, really quickly. I mean, just recently, the World's Aviation Authority had to realign the instrumentation for measuring the poles. There's a global authority that's responsible for setting up the positioning of the magnetic poles so that you can have the GPS system functioning at the optimal level. They've had to actually accelerate the readjustments that they do every 5 years because the magnetic poles are moving so quickly. So this is a sign of the magnetic poles actually not only realigning but also weakening very, very quickly. And because of that weakening, we're having more solar rays coming in, hitting the Earth, going into the poles, and that's triggering the possibility of a pole shift. We're talking about a geophysical pole shift. And this is where the physical poles actually realign, so the Earth's crust can shift, as was predicted by people like Charles Hapgood back in the 50s. And his book, The Earth's Shifting Crust, was actually endorsed by Albert Einstein, who wrote the foreword to it, because the data that Hapgood had assembled was so compelling that Einstein thought that this was a real possibility. We could have a pole shift. And so this possibility is now really looking very, very likely with the magnetic pole weakening so quickly, and we're seeing evidence of the pole shift happening much more quickly than we ever thought possible.
So what are the implications if this polar shift happened in the most extreme way? Would we be the lands shift from one side of the globe to the other in a matter of 24 hours?
It could, yes, in a matter of a day. It would be the worst day on the planet Earth. They've predicted that the planet could either shift in phases or do a 90-degree or more shift. And they've actually found, geologists have found signs of prior equators in the ocean, where they think that equators were in the past. They're now at different angles because the Earth has shifted. And this occurs every 200,000 years or so, an actual polar shift. And we're well overdue.
So you've been in some of these top secret underground military bunkers. Would these engineers, the engineering behind it, survive this polar shift in the case scenario that you're talking about?
That's a good question. Now, they found signs that people had survived these types of things in the past by doing that. In Turkey, I can't remember the name of the site, the underground site where it looks like someone had carved out the big tunnel network, and they had areas for livestock and for thousands of people. Well, that would have been a perfect place to take a population if you saw the signs and knew that this solar event was about to happen. And we know what those signs are in the sky. And we found out that the symbols that we found in petroglyphs in ancient caves were depictions of electroplasmic discharges that they were seeing in the sky just before a major event occurred. So that was a sign that they knew that the Earth was about to shift again, or whatever their beliefs told them was occurring when that happened.
So there are certain indications now that are foretelling that this event may be happening soon in our lifetime?
Yeah, I believe it's in like 1982 or 86. There was a scientist named Paul Leveille, I believe his name was, and he was postulating that our solar system was moving into a more energetic part of the galaxy, out of the protection of some other stars and out to where more cosmic rays were going to hit us. And as those cosmic rays come in, they come into our sun, and they also come into the Earth. And as they come into the Earth, they begin to heat the center of the Earth more. And as it's heating, you begin to see more energetic storms on the surface, which we've seen. You begin to see volcanoes starting to pop, which we're starting to see. More earthquakes. All of these things are signs of the times, so to speak, but it's all scientifically explainable. They're side effects of this energetic wave coming in.
So it's been speculated that maybe the history books or even scientists have gotten all wrong as far as the extinction of the dinosaurs, the great floods, that it was attributed to a polar shift versus an asteroid or meteor.
Right, yeah, and the problem with mainstream science these days is that they have data, but then they have this solution already predetermined in their minds, and they want that data to fit that model, so they throw out the data that's inconvenient for that. When you actually look at all of the data holistically, like you said, it actually brings the polar shift into the picture. We actually see marks on planets throughout our solar system, like Mars. You can see a big gash into the Martian surface. You can find this on Earth as well. It's covered up more because oceans, forest, and whatnot. But especially when you look at Mars, you see that big gash. That's reminiscent of a sort of electric strike that hit the planetary surface. Now, if you couple that in with the idea that we're in a solar activation cycle, and it is actually a cyclical nature of our sun to pop off what's called micronovas, or huge solar flares, solar flashes, many different names we could call it, and then that in turn affects all the other planets in the solar system in various ways. Boom, there's an effect of it. The electroplasma discharge on the Martian surface.
So you've been doing a lot of research with the secret of, well, basically the declassified Space Force. Is this maybe in preparation for a major polar shift? What's your investigated? How's this gone in that direction?
What I think's going on with the Space Force is that, of course, we have black budget programs that are taking in billions and billions, if not trillions of dollars, and they've been in existence since 50s and 60s, if not before that. So if we do have an alliance, group of white hats, call it what you will, trying to gain power, control, and disclose various hidden truths to the public, well, they need to, number one, gain access to these black projects, these secret space programs, and they need an avenue to disclose these things with. So what better way to do that than to create a sixth branch of the military, call it the Space Force, get the military to get control, gain access to these programs, and then use that as a way to start slowly disclosing this to the public. Now, I wouldn't doubt that in the high levels of, say, this alliance, that they know very well about the polar shift and the solar flash, and they're making preparations for it. You know, one thing I've been thinking of recently is all these booms we've heard around the country. Booms people are hearing everywhere. Could be such that maybe there's some underground complexes being built out to house a certain amount of people around the country if that solar flash did go off. You know, there could be preparations being made, absolutely, for them to protect as many people as possible and help us go through this, not just solar flash and solar shift, but it's going to affect our planet too. Our planet, us, our DNA, our consciousness. And we're going to need a lot of help getting through that, of course, because how many people out there are wholly ignorant of the whole topic.
So what's the implication if there's a sudden pole shift? What are the ramifications for humankind? Is there a danger?
The big danger with the pole shift is exactly how much are the Earth's poles going to realign. If we actually have the Earth's crust realigning by a number of degrees, maybe just a few degrees, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, I mean, there'll be really tremendous repercussions. Not only will the magnetic poles realign, but the actual Earth will shift.
So there's this new term called the micronova. Can you tell us about it?
So a micronova is a solar flare that's X100 or above, which is just a massive solar flare. And what it's doing is it's emitting an enormous amount of plasma. So if it actually occurs, you would have a micronova emitting this enormous energy, this plasma that would go out throughout the solar system, and it would slam into the planets with the force of asteroids. The kind of devastation you could expect from an asteroid impacting the Earth, that wouldn't be nearly as much as if you had a micronova sending out this enormous ball of plasma going out throughout the solar system and hitting the Earth, like with all of the energy coming directly from the sun, far exceeding anything that any one asteroid could do. So this would be devastating the entire surface of the planet facing the sun. So anything in that category of a micronova, an X100, could bring about major Earth catastrophe all over that area facing the sun.
What about our governments prepping for this or letting the American public know that this event may be coming up in the near future? Will they keep it a secret from us?
They'll keep it a secret. They plan to, although it's starting to come out now because we're getting so close to the time period, in the next decade. But for decades, they've been spending a certain percentage of the gross national product of each country on building these underground bunkers to help people survive. And there are going to be people that are given golden tickets and they're brought down into these places. I've mentioned that these solar sneezes that we kind of jokingly call them occur on a cyclic basis, and they've happened back into antiquity. And we have information that a army whistleblower is being prepared to come forward to bring a lot of very interesting information about what they've been doing in the Grand Canyon. A lot of people, if you study the U.S. Army's activity in the Grand Canyon, they took over that area, a couple hundred years ago, and took a lot of it away from the natives, of course. What they found is a cavern system that goes deep down into the earth just giant cracks, basically, that go deep down into the earth that you can navigate fairly easily, and they open up into larger caverns. And in those larger caverns, they found big adobe villages that were built, broken pottery. It was very obvious that a population had survived there for a long term. And they found a lot of other interesting things, including giants with elongated skulls. And that's information that I'm told that this U.S. Army whistleblower is going to be bringing out very soon. And I don't think they're going to be contacting me. They may contact you guys or someone else out there. But they're being prepped.
Do you think this is preventable? Any kind of technology would be able to prevent a polar shift?
No, this is a natural cycle. This happens to be a solar system that has a very turbulent cycle, and we reported on this information in our movie Above Majestic, which we talked with you about before. It's on iTunes and Amazon, and we're going to be expanding on this topic greatly in our follow-up to Above Majestic.
So there's obviously preparation going on, underground bases, facilities being built, and people are behind in the construction in regards to this. How are they keeping them silent and not getting the word out that, hey, we're building this in preparation for a polar shift?
Very good question, and the answer to this helps understand not just building underground bases, but building spacecraft, building really anything involving these black projects. And the first answer to that is compartmentalization. So when you have these engineers, these scientists, these developers compartmentalized in these different projects, you can literally have somebody working on something different in the next room. You have no idea what they're working on, even though you're right next to them. You could have a group of engineers building, say, a spacecraft, and they're all building small parts of it. Everybody's building a different part. They have no idea what they're building it for. They're not told. They're dialed in with their orders, and they're just told to do this, so they do that. And then you get 1,000 people building 1,000 different parts. Then you have just a couple individuals, maybe a handful of them, working to put it all together for the final production. So only a couple people know the full scope of the operation. Compartmentalization is very important to understand when trying to, of course, analyze what's going on with all these programs, but also the idea of threat. So many individuals are threatened, they're blackmailed, they're threatened with harm, violence. Could be paid off. A few of them could be paid off. They could also be threatened with losing their jobs, losing their careers, whatever it is needed to keep them shut up. So yeah, they sign the NDAs, they sign the non-disclosure agreements, but then if they do still let some tidbits of information out, because these people are monitored, their phones are monitored, and it's usually a 2-degree monitoring, so they don't only monitor you, they monitor the people you talk to and the people they talk to. So it's a couple degrees, so they can keep it clamped down. They have the intelligence of, make sure no leaks happen with the project. So it's a multi-step process in how they keep this all secret.
So what kind of indicators would we be seeing that if this event were coming up that we'd notice?
Solar flash pole shift.
Yeah.
So we are already seeing some indications that this is coming soon. Having to do with the Earth, we're seeing the both north and south magnetic poles track. They're tracking faster and faster. It's exponentially faster. So they just had to totally redesign the world geomagnetic model because of how fast these poles are shifting. So not just that, but they also found that there's these particles being emanated from Antarctica. Neutrinos, I believe they are. This has never happened before. Could that be new cosmic rays coming in? Some sort of symptom that we're moving towards this solar flash. And then also there's all sorts of electroplasma anomalies we're seeing on this Earth. Noctilucent clouds are one. Noctilucent clouds are pretty incredible, and I've seen them before with my naked eye. They're pretty rare, but they're becoming much less rare, which is the interesting part. Noctilucent clouds are not really clouds like water vapor. They're actually ionized plasma up in the atmosphere, and it's 50 miles up, which is 10 miles higher than the highest water vapor clouds, cirrus clouds. These are 50-mile high clouds, and they glow. They're glowing because it's ionized plasma. Now, normally these noctilucent clouds are only found over the poles, but in recent years they've been finding them farther and farther away from the poles, almost as far south as, at least from the North Pole, as, say, Kentucky, Middle America. I've seen them in Washington State with my own eyes, and I was wondering, what is that? That's one symptom that we're moving towards a whole shift. Not just that, but plasma anomalies. The European Space Agency last year was seeing plasma ropes above the North Pole. They didn't even know what to call it or what was going on. So there's all sorts of weird things happening that lets us know we're getting very close to it.
Do you think this secret space program is basically effort in regards to maybe possibly relocating human civilizations to?
The way they, the carrot that they gave all of these countries secretly to get them to give a certain percentage of their GDP that was going to underground bases and a secret space program was what they called a continuity of species program, that they were going to relocate humans underground on different planets and planetoids in our solar system and in the closest 13 stars, so that if there was if our sun went supernova, humanity would survive. That was the plan. And so they started getting all of these funds, and they started building, like China is building all of these underground facilities to where they'll bring people from each country. It won't just be for Chinese people. They're designated, and it's a world government-owned operation. And it's the same with the secret space program. That secret space program has been going out there looking for signs to prove that this solar event was going to happen, and then to find a way to relocate humanity or a portion of us so that we survive.
So do you think the major media isn't letting us know, or they're forced not to let the people know?
Absolutely. Number one, the mainstream media, they just don't know. They're ignorant because they're told to report on. Their focus is in so many other topics that they have no idea about this sort of stuff that we're talking about. Number two, if they do catch wind of it, want to report on something, they can't. They'll lose their job, again, threatened, whatever the case, to shut them up, not get this information out, which is why the only way it's getting out is through independent citizen journalists on social media. And this is why social media is becoming so censored, because they don't want to get many of these topics out there. They don't want the people connecting the dots.
Are you taking any preparations yourself for this event if it's coming up in the near future?
Getting my heart space centered, my mind space centered. I'm not going as crazy into the physical preparations as some people are. They're getting their bomb shelters and their rations of food and whatnot. I have faith that all will be well. And, one massive thing that's going to happen with this solar activation cycle, this quantum solar shift, as I sometimes refer to it as, is consciousness shift. These cosmic rays affect our DNA and affect our consciousness. So I think that is the most important thing to get centered and to ground and to make sure you have in nice order rather than the physical goods. That solar flash goes off, our grid goes down, great. Your food rations are only going to last you so long. In fact, it would probably be better if you just had the skills. You knew how to make a fire, you knew how to hunt, you knew how to do these particular things. That's important, and then also making sure your consciousness is on the right level to receive these particular downloads, whatever they are, whatever we get, whenever they're going to happen.
Do you have any heads up in regards to the polar shift? If it does go down, what would you be doing? What's your plan?
A good idea is to look where military bases have been put. I was instructed that the Ozarks and the Colorado area, which is where I moved, were safe zones. So I moved my family there really quickly after learning how valid this information is.
So this Adam and Eve CIA document recently released.
Very, yeah.
It's interesting that they call it Adam and Eve, almost like it's the creation, but then the end.
Yeah, and it's almost like, well, they should have called it the Noah's Ark story, I guess, because that's where that story came from, and it's a cycle that occurs. They think that the Young Adrias event that happened, what was it, 12,000 years ago or so? They think that was a solar event. They used to say it must have been a comet or a comet fragment that collided with the Earth's atmosphere. But now we're looking back and we're finding out that the KT boundary around the planet, when the dinosaurs were killed 65 million years ago, that very likely was a part of this cyclic solar event. and it helps us determine what happened to the Earth's atmosphere. These solar winds buffeting, they strip away the atmosphere, like it's what happened on Mars. And the Earth used to be much closer to the sun and used to have a much thicker atmosphere. And these events pushed the Earth away and stripped away the atmosphere. So we have a much lower barometric pressure now than we did when the dinosaurs were here. That's why they grew so big.
So the Great Deluge could have been attributed to a polar shift versus then a meteorite or asteroid strike.
Much of what they describe, when you hear the stars roll up like a scroll, and the stars are not where they were before, it's not because the stars moved, it's because the Earth moved.
The secrets behind the age regression program is about to get blown wide open. Dr. Michael Salla recently spoke with a whistleblower who claims to have worked in the secret space program. We're about to hear incredible insight from his connection, apparently with the Palladians, in regards to the information that has just come out on the Nature's Journal. Stand by, everybody. We've got Michael Salla, and I had the pleasure to interview him today.
Yeah, the results came out in an article that was published in the journal Nature, which is one of the world's most prestigious scientific journals, and basically it was talking about this clinical study conducted by the University of California out of Los Angeles on 9 men, where they were testing a cocktail of drugs that was based on growth hormones and anti-diabetics medications, and they were marking whether or not this would actually help them in terms of treating thyroid problems. But what they found instead, in looking at the results in terms of the genetics, the genomes, that looking at the markers in the genomes, that on average the 9 men in the studies, that their age was regressed 2.5 years, which is amazing, because that was not really what they were trying to do. That they were trying to find out if that cocktail of drugs could actually help with thyroid issues, but instead they found, accidentally, supposedly, that this age regressed the men 2.5 years. And to me, this is a sign that this is actually not a kind of accidental byproduct of a clinical study, but I think it's a kind of slow process of disclosure that scientists in the white world are being encouraged to go down the track of experimenting with different cocktails of drugs, which can actually result in this kind of age regression phenomenon that secret space program whistleblowers say that was used on them to age regress them an average of 20 years. Well, there have been a number of scientists that have been studying the possibility of age regression, and they've been testing various pharmaceutical products on rats. And the first studies came out around 3 years ago, and they thought that the first clinical studies on humans would be conducted in 5 years' time. So that was the speculation at the time, based on the studies that had produced some kind of age regression on particular organs on rats that were subjected to some kind of treatment. So now with this study that just came out in Nature, what that does is that basically it gives white world scientists a kind of heads up that this is very real, that you actually can age regress. It's just coming up with the right combination of drugs, the right cocktail that can actually produce this kind of really dramatic age regression effect. And I think the result is going to be that white world scientists that have already been working in the area of age regression are going to look at these results and see how that can be applied to the kind of scientific knowledge that they've put together so far in these earlier clinical studies on rats and age regress in particular organs, and now looking at whether or not they can actually come up with a more stable cocktail or something that is going to be feasible for releasing into the general market. So in other words, I think that white world scientists, pharmaceutical companies are being encouraged to invest resources in continuing doing clinical studies and doing trials to find out exactly what what the right combination of drugs is, growth hormones and whatever else is needed to be able to produce age regression so that it can go out to the market.
So basically, whistleblowers like Corey Goode have been speaking about this age regression technology for many years now. And now that this Nature article comes out, it does basically redeem Corey Goode in his basic statements. Can you further explain the age regression progress, and is it a possible alien connection here?
Well, this study that came out that was discussed in the Nature article, basically that corroborates what Corey Goode and other insiders like William Tompkins have been saying for a few years now, since 2015, that they either directly worked on developing this kind of drug cocktail that could actually be used to age regress people who were part of this 20 and back program. That Corey Goode, Michael Ralph and others that were part of this secret space program said that at the end of their 20-year program, a cocktail of drugs was actually used to age regress them. William Tompkins says that from 1967 to 1971, he worked at TRW as a systems engineer to help them work out exactly how to develop this cocktail of drugs for age regression. And Tompkins, importantly, he pointed out that this was something that the human-looking Nordic extraterrestrials, or many people today would describe them as Pleiadian extraterrestrials, that they actually were helping the US Navy develop this cocktail of drugs for use on secret space program participants. So this was something that was being developed in the 1960s and the 1970s by companies like TRW, and it's being used on many thousands of secret space program whistleblowers like Corey Goode. And the thing is now, what we're seeing with these scientific studies that are coming out, that's corroboration that this age regression technology does work, and that it involves a cocktail of everyday drugs that many companies are now producing, but it's just coming up with the right combination, and you can actually age regress people. And this is really important because I think that this is going to be a vehicle for disclosure.
So Michael, could you tell us about this new whistleblower on the block? Basically worked within the same program as Corey Goode, and they've had the same experiences and experiments done on them. Now, what does this new whistleblower have to say?
This new whistleblower that I've just begun communicating with just in the last several weeks, I mean, his testimony is really remarkable. I mean, he's a professional engineer, and he has his own company. He wishes to remain anonymous, so I can't say anything about his name or his company. But he says that in 1979, he was recruited into the secret space program that was run by the Navy. He served for 20 years, and at the end of that 20 years, he was age regressed. And he says that during the major portion of that 20-year service, he was actually on a Pleiadian mothership, along with a number of other Navy people that had been recruited for the program. And these were primarily professionals. We're talking about engineers, we're talking about medical doctors, we're talking about psychologists, engineers, scientists and so forth, who were basically being trained in their professions from the perspective of the Pleiadian sciences. And their goal was, when they would come back into human society, eventually they would share this information. Well, he just in the last couple of years has regained his memories of this service, and he remembers the age regression process that he went through, and that this involved a cocktail of drugs. Now, because he's a chemical engineer, he is familiar with some of the principles behind this kind of technology, and so he's been reverse engineering, if you like, this cocktail. And so he is in the process of putting together the right combination of drugs that were used on him and others to age regress them 20 years for this secret space program. And he's hoping that in the next year or so, that he's going to be able to come up with that combination of drugs so that he can then make it open source information, so that people in the world can then start experimenting with this cocktail of drugs and start age regression themselves. So he's working on this now. He's developing a protocol for doing this, and what's really fascinating about this man is that not only is he someone who has been through the age regression process himself, with his cocktail is being used on him, but he's also being helped by Pleiadian extraterrestrials. Even now, he's still in communication with them. And they're helping him because he believes that this age regression technology is going to be one of the main ways in which the whole disclosure process can move forward. Because once this becomes commonly available as open source information, then the whole world is going to start recognizing that, you know, the stories of these Navy secret space program whistleblowers is actually based on fact.
It's about this recipe, and it needs to be cracked for the exact recipe to work for this age regression. Is there going to be some kind of patent or a secret recipe once major companies get involved? How are they going to keep this a secret or even get it to the public without any kind of suppression?
Well, I think what's really important here with this person who's actually working on reverse engineering this drug cocktail is that he's developing the right combination. He's looking at what was used on him, and he's being given guidance. He says that he's in telepathic communications with the Pleiadians that actually he was meeting with during his secret space program with the Navy. So he served on a Pleiadian mothership that was part of this agreement that the Navy had reached with the Pleiadians to kind of share information, to pool resources, so that in the future, when humanity was ready for all of this to be revealed, there would be people that would be knowledgeable about these advanced technologies. And so this age regression technology is one of the things that he believes that he can provide expertise on. So he's getting ready for that. He's going to do it in a way where he's going to make it open source. And the benefits of that is that by making it open source, I mean, he's not going to be liable to kind of like litigation or, you know, lawsuits or anything like that by people who try whatever cocktail of drugs he recommends. Because it's all going to be open source, and it's like, well, this is what worked on me and it can work on you, and people will try it and at their own risk. But I think what will happen is that whatever cocktail he produces, I think will be very likely will be effective and will knock off a few years of a person's life or age regress them.
So what you're actually saying is that he's going to create a recipe, this cocktail, and give it out in an open source way that the information is free for anybody to use.
That's exactly right. He's going to make it open source. Anyone can use it. This was a cocktail of drugs that was used in age regression on me. That'll be the approach he takes us, and it can work on you too. So he'll invite people to try it out. And so the thing is, this is the way to get the information out to as many people as possible. And that way, what I think will occur is that the pharmaceutical companies will then follow up and perfect the technique, come out with their own recommended cocktail, which will probably be more effective because they have the scientific resources in the laboratories to kind of fine-tune the cocktail, so that, you know, rather than knocking off, say, 5 years of your life, you could knock off 20 or 30 years. And I think this is why this kind of technology is not going to be suppressed, because the pharmaceutical companies will understand that they can make billions, even trillions of dollars of these kinds of age regression technologies using, you know, particular cocktails of commonly known drugs. Some of them can be very expensive, but nevertheless, this cocktail is something that I think is going to be part of the process of people awakening to the truth about secret space programs that utilize these kinds of advanced technologies regularly. Because, you know, at the end of the day, you know, this has been going on since the 1970s. The Navy has been using this kind of cocktail of drugs to age regress people. So, you know, they've perfected it. So they know exactly how to knock off, say, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years off a person's life. So I think as this kind of information enters into the white world, you know, there'll be kind of trial and error to begin with. But I think at the end of the day,
age regression is going to be as real as just going to the doctors and having kind of like treatments for, you know, many common illnesses that people have.